Welcome to your Module 2 introduction video. This is Dr. Dombrowski for Education 741. This module will be a deep dive into language comprehension, which is the very root of reading comprehension. First, you're asked to read Shift 1 in Shifting the Balance by Berkins and Yaris. I love how the authors address the concept of comprehension well before they get into the weeds of word learning skills. Comprehension, after all, begins as soon as we learn to interact with other humans and our world around us. This chapter carefully explains the science of comprehension as it connects to listening, language, and various processing systems. Listening comprehension is not what you might think. It's not our ability to follow commands or directions. Actually, it's defined as the capacity to understand spoken language. Well before children even think of starting school, they show signs of listening comprehension as they respond to their caregivers. Therefore, we can easily understand how essential the role of discussion is in exposing children to ideas, to language structures, and to vocabulary. When we encounter a phrase, our brain utilizes the phonological processing system to recognize each of the words, then our meaning processing system to recognize the meanings of individual words, and finally the context processing system to inject language and background knowledge to put it all together into a meaningful chunk. That system works efficiently and naturally in conversation. Reading works much the same way because when you think about it, our brain is actually saying the words to itself as it listens to itself, like having an internal audiobook that only you can hear. There's just one teeny tiny, not so natural process that the brain has to learn in order to read, and that is called orthographic processing. This system allows our eyes to recognize that symbols on a page translate to words we use. The simple view of reading shows us that reading comprehension is dependent on both phonics, which includes decoding, sight words, and phonological awareness, and language, which includes background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. Because we accept that our reading comprehension and language capacity are directly correlated, it then stands to reason that our reading comprehension abilities are only as advanced as our own language capacity. I'm sure you've had students who say, "Oh, I can read it, but I just don't understand it. I don't get it." Their decoding skills may far exceed their comprehension abilities. We can still only understand texts insofar as our language complexity, our background knowledge, our vocabulary, our literacy knowledge, and our life experiences support. No amount of skill drill will compensate for the limitations of a child's listening comprehension and what that places on their reading comprehension. That's why we must make such an important part of classroom discussion, which includes modeling, reading aloud with accountable talk, conversation, content area instruction, turn and talk, and book clubs. Then for Chapter 4, Language Comprehension, again we revisit the concept of language and the defining role it plays in reading comprehension. As we learn in this chapter, language comprehension, reading comprehension, it's so much more than learning and employing reading strategies like summarizing and finding the main idea and using graphic organizers. It actually requires the reader to draw upon their background knowledge, their vocabulary, their verbal reasoning, their literacy knowledge and exposure, and their understanding of language structures, and the ability to strategically apply all of these elements during reading to comprehend texts. In other words, just teaching them reading strategies alone is never going to cut it. Munger explains the critical importance of background knowledge as well as what we educators can do to provide or activate a reader's background knowledge to increase their reading comprehension. So best practices include teacher read-alouds, making sure we expose them to grade level texts, even though they might not be able to decode grade level texts, and text sets, if you're familiar with that concept. That's multiple versions of a theme across various modes. So you might have like a tornado text set or a poetry text set. We can also increase students' exposure to rich vocabulary by, of course, modeling in our own language and by creating a curiosity and interest in words. In terms of vocabulary, we need to consider what it means to know a word. Most word learning is incidental, right? And this happens organically through conversation and through listening. However, some vocabulary knowledge needs to be intentional. That's where we would want to teach Tier 2 words. That's the sweet spot for increasing student knowledge of high leverage words that occur across multiple domains. So Tier 1 words would be everyday words, really common words, the, and, if. Tier 3 words might be, I guess it's better for me to explain how our natural tendency when we are teaching words in a text might be to pick the longest, most domain-specific word, like photosynthesis or amendment. Those would be our Tier 3 words that only live in a domain and they're essential for understanding one text. But it actually pays more dividends to talk about the words we assume students already know, but might have nuanced meaning in different contexts or subjects. Connecting words, words here like unique, convenient, remarkable, and misery. Consider a word like potential, for instance. That means something very different in science class than it does in physical education or even in language arts. Munger also talks about language structures and semantics, which refers to the rules for how words are structured and the arrangement of words within sentences and phrases. Obviously, being a native speaker of a language provides a clear advantage with comprehension, and mastery of semantics of a language plays a clear and obvious role in understanding text and building comprehension. We can teach language structures directly through studying words and word parts, as well as grammar structures and the multiple meanings of words. A big part of this includes understanding idioms, figurative language, slang, humor, patterns of conversation, and dialogue. Those sound like big words and concepts, but we actually start modeling and discussing this with our earliest learners sooner than you think. Learning a language's structure is a lifetime endeavor that we are always polishing and fine-tuning. You'll also read chapters 4 and 5 in The Reading Mind by Willingham. In chapter 4, Willingham tackles the same question as Munger. What does it mean to truly know a word? Research shows us it's not just about how many words you know, but also the nuanced meanings of those words that are very sensitive to context. If you love talking about words and language, this chapter is actually quite delightful. Our brain is like a dictionary for all the knowledge we have about words, but it's organized less like Webster's and actually more like a U.S. highway map. And perhaps that's also how we should teach words. We know that readers need to know about 98% of the words in a text in order to comprehend it. And if you've ever done a miscue analysis or a running record of a student's oral reading, you'll recall that a student isn't considered independent at a level unless they have at least 96% accuracy, give or take, whichever protocol you're using. So there's a clear connection here between word knowledge, automaticity, and having the mental energy to make meaning out of a text. These percentages seem high, 96, 98, but they need to be to maintain stamina and engagement. If you think about it, if you're stopping the flow of your reading to think too hard about what a word is or what it means, you'll lose the thread of your comprehension and you're quickly going to lose interest too. Finally, in chapter 5, we move away from just language-centric conversation and into the discovery of reading comprehension. How does print convey thoughts, and how does our brain comprehend a text? William explains reading comprehension is composed of 3 processes. First, we extract ideas from sentences, then we connect these ideas to one another, and then we build general knowledge of what the text is about. My question to you is, how does this description square with your understanding of the simple view of reading and Scarborough's rope? Okay, so for assignments with this module, of course you will complete your writer's notebook or your teacher's diary, cataloging your learning and your connections. In your discussion post, you'll be given a menu of prompts. You can speak to one or more of these ideas as you see fit. And as always, you'll share an original post of 300 to 500 words by the first deadline, and then return over the next week to post 2 responses to your colleagues by the second deadline to encourage collaborative thinking. Last, you will also add to your Philosophy of Literacy Statement graphic organizer. In this module, we learned about language and comprehension, so please jot your thoughts while it is fresh on your mind. Enjoy Module 2.